Joining us now is the former head of the Home Civil Service, that's Lord Butler. Hello, my Lord. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning.
How tricky is it for civil servants when we have a sort of caretaker? I'm being told not to call him a caretaker Prime Minister, but that's what he is.
Well, the job of the civil service is to keep the show on the road. And so it's not really very tricky, and it's not a very long period. During the next 10 days it is, while Parliament's sitting and until it's whittled down to the last two, there shouldn't be any major decisions to be taken, and major decisions shouldn't be taken. And then during the period when the Conservative Party is consulting in the country, then there's really only two candidates, and they can be consulted on any major decisions that have to be taken.
What about when we saw ministers dropping like flies last week? Were there enough ministers? 25% had gone from the Prime Minister's government. Not enough to run the country, we were told.
No, absolutely not. And so a lot of business couldn't go on. There weren't people to attend parliamentary committees. And so things virtually ground to a stop. But again, there wasn't an awful lot to do. Parliament goes into recess in the summer. And so, you know, you can operate for quite a long time without all the politicians being in place.
As far as civil servants are concerned, I don't know if you managed to catch our interview, it'll be online as well, with the present Chancellor. He was saying that he had successfully managed to cut 20% from the budget of the running costs of the Department of Education. He wants to do that across the whole of government in order to have enough money for tax cuts. That would mean job losses for civil servants, surely?
Yes, I expect it would. When I was Private Secretary to Margaret Thatcher, the civil service was cut by 100,000. Now, it's not impossible to do that. The question is how it's done, and it ought to be done with respect and with care for the people who you're employing.
We did hear the Prime Minister talk about the peerless British civil service when he made his speech that we'll call a resignation speech last week. But he once tried to cut, 90,000 jobs in the civil service over the cost of living crisis. How important is it to have a Prime Minister that is duly respectful of the staff around him?
Well, it's very important. I always think of Gerald Ratner, you remember?
I do, very much so.
And you don't give leadership, you don't get loyalty, you don't get results if you don't treat your employees with respect.
When we talk about the civil service, people at home this morning getting ready for work were thinking, what does the civil service actually do? And the answer is, you know, all sorts of things. They don't just work in offices in Whitehall here, do they? They work in prisons, they work all over the place.
Yes, and it's their job to support the government of the day, to support its policies and to carry them out as efficiently as they can.
And they are roles that are non-political? That must be quite tricky on occasion?
Well, of course, I mean, government is about politics, but you mustn't take a partisan view. So what civil servants have to do is to work for the government that the electors produce.
And how difficult is the transition, not only from when you have one Prime Minister of the same colour to another one, you know, whoever the next Conservative Prime Minister will be, but also when you have a complete change of regime?
Well, it can be a bit of a personal trauma.
Yes, I'm sure. So tell me more about that.
Yeah, well, you get very close to the person you're working with. I got very close to John Major, and then Tony Blair came in. And then you just have to demonstrate that you are going to do your best for the new incumbent as professionally as you can. And you can usually build up confidence about that quite quickly.
This period, you say it is a period of transition, but it's fairly straightforward, you think, as far as the civil servants are concerned. Are you saying that it's just basically a holding pattern, they're marking time? What if the present Prime Minister decides that he does want to push through some major policy, I don't know, on the Northern Ireland Protocol while this process is going through?
Well, it's not a very long time.
About 6 weeks, isn't it? About 6 weeks, maybe?
Well, 6 weeks, but only 10 days, probably, until we're down to the last two candidates. And the Prime Minister shouldn't do that. He'd be advised not to do that.
By whom?
By the head of the civil service, by the cabinet secretary, not least. And ministers would be advised in a similar way by the permanent secretaries in their departments. And I would expect them to comply with that.
And as far as, just before I let you go, because I know you're terribly busy, when we've seen what's been happening in Downing Street over a period of time during lockdown, how much did you feel for those civil servants that were working there at the time?
Oh, I felt for them very acutely. I mean, I think for everybody, the COVID was a very difficult time and they were working extremely hard. But I was also ashamed of some of the behaviour that went on in 10 Downing Street. It shouldn't have happened. I don't believe it would have happened when I was working there because we had such respect for the institution, for the government. We felt privileged to be there and we felt respect for the Prime Ministers whom we served.
And the way Sue Gray was treated?
Well, I think Sue Gray was put in a very difficult position. I don't think, a civil servant can ever really be asked to judge on the behaviour of their boss. And so Sue Gray produced the facts. It wasn't for her to produce a judgment. I think she handled it very well in a very difficult situation.
And if the same situation or a similar situation were to develop again, you don't think that it would be for a civil servant to find themselves in that position? So who should judge on the Prime Minister's behaviour?
It has to be the Cabinet, Parliament and eventually the electorate.
Well, let's see what happens. Good to talk to you, my lord. Thank you so much for joining us. Much appreciated.
Pleasure.
Thank you.